सरकार में है या पार्टी में है, हम सब लोगों को मौका दिया है। बाकी पार्टीज भी युवाओं की बात करती हैं, लेकिन वो ज़्यादातर लिप सर्विस होती है, क्योंकि बोलना आजकल अनिवार्य है, इसलिए युवाओं को हम आगे लाएंगे बोलते हैं।
युवाओं को जो जिम्मेदारी दी गई है, अब हमारी जिम्मेदारी बनेगी कि उन अपेक्षाओं पर हम लोग खड़े उतरें।
Hello and welcome to We Mean Business. It's a week that saw several new and young faces being inducted into the cabinet as the government reshuffled key portfolios. Two of those ministries in question, that's power and corporate affairs, are particularly important from a business and economy standpoint and have been in the news for all the wrong reasons in the past few months. But with two of the country's youngest politicians at the helm of these portfolios, that's Jyotiraditya Scindia with power and Sachin Pilot as MOS independent charge at the MCA, just what are some of the things that we can expect? More importantly, what are some of the crucial challenges these ministers will have to tackle, and are they really up for the job? Joining me to discuss all of this and more is a power-packed panel. On the power side, we have Suresh, Prabhu, former Union Minister of Power, Pramod Deo, the chairman of CERC, the power regulatory body, and representing the industry, Ashok Khurana from the Association of Power Producers. Later on the show, we'd also be joined by Mohandas Pai of Manipal Global, HP Ranina corporate lawyer, and Aditi Fadnas of Business Standard to discuss the crucial challenges that India's young new corporate affairs minister Sachin Pilot faces as he takes charge. But before we get on to the discussion, let's flag off some very important news that came in earlier in the day. The EGOM deciding to steer ahead with partial refarming of spectrum in allowing telcos to retain 2.5 megahertz in the 900 megahertz band. Arijit Banerjee, please.
Giving some sort of relief to the existing telecom operators like Bharti, Vodafone Idea, BSNL, MTNL, the empowered group of ministers allowing these operators to retain 2.5 megahertz of spectrum, giving them the option to retain this 2.5 megahertz of spectrum when the 900 megahertz comes for refarming. Refarming basically means that when the licenses are going to come up for renewal, these operators will have to return the 900 megahertz spectrum and bid for fresh spectrum. However, by allowing them to retain, what the EGM has done is bring a certain amount of certainty in terms of the ability of these operators to plan for their future. So they will have the ability to retain this 2.5 megahertz. However, this will not be for free. They will have to pay whatever price is discovered in the auction for this 900 megahertz spectrum. Not only that, if they want to further increase this from 2.5 to let's say 5 megahertz, they will again have to participate in the auction and get spectrum from there. So a small relief, not a major relief for operators. However, this does bring in some amount of certainty for most of the existing telecom operators. The bigger players, of course, had been talking about allowing them to retain full 5 megahertz of spectrum, that not being agreed to by the empowered group of ministers. Very interestingly, apart from this, the empowered group of ministers also deciding on the issue of merger and acquisition. What they have basically said is that for all those companies whose spectrum is not liberalized, that means that they are not buying the spectrum through the auction process and are not paying the auction determined price. For example, those companies which have still spectrum below 4.4 megahertz will, when any other company buys them, the company will have to pay the differential between the auction determined price and the 1658 crore which had been paid by these companies earlier when they were given licenses and spectrum. So basically what it means is that nobody can bypass the market mechanism by trying to acquire companies and not pay the market price for auction. If they buy these companies, they will again have to pay the market price for auction, and the government will transfer spectrum to them from these companies to the new buyer only after this market price has been paid. So in a way, the government saying that this loophole is also being closed. The only way that you can get extra spectrum is by participating in the auction and buying spectrum there. Apart from that, these decisions now, apart from the refarming decision, the decision on the one-time fee and the M&A will go to the cabinet for final approval. It is likely that on 8th of November, the cabinet will take up these critical issues. Back to you.
Well, important policy development there in the telecom sector, but let's get moving straight on with our first discussion topic of the day. Now, a whopping 65,000 megawatts worth of power capacity in India is held up due to coal shortages. 8,000 megawatts worth of gas-based projects, in fact, is stuck because of lack of gas, and India's peak power deficit hovers around the 9% mark. SEBs are saddled with losses T&D losses are unacceptably high and financing is becoming increasingly tough to come by. And while some positive measures have been taken, the question really is, are they enough, and what really needs to be done by the new power minister to change the status quo? Let's first get in Mr. Ashok Khurana with his views on what really the new power minister needs to do. Mr. Khurana, a lot has been done already in the sector in terms of reforms. You represent the industry. We've seen positives on the SEB restructuring side. We've also seen some bit of action there on Coal India being forced to sign FSAs. What are your other key expectations from the minister, and do you think he will really live up to it?
My idea is the biggest challenge before the minister is the fuel. As you yourself said, about 65,000 megawatt of installed capacity is working under 50% of capacity utilization. Now, we really can't have that situation because they cannot meet their fixed charges and country is facing widespread shortages. So the biggest challenge before the minister is how to mainstream imported fuel cost in the power tariff structure, because domestic gas and supply cannot meet the growing power requirement. The deficit is going to increase progressively to almost about 200 million ton by end of 12th plan. So if we want power, we need to import coal and gas, and we need to find a suitable mechanism how to integrate this in the tariff structure. If you really see, post Act 2003, we had all the new tariff policy, new electricity policy, but nowhere it is mentioned about how to deal with the fuel shortages. So what country needs and look forward for the new minister is actually to formulate a comprehensive all-weather tariff policy which deals with variations in the fuel availability and its pricing. Otherwise, the existing and the upcoming capacity will remain stranded, creating systemic risk for the banking sector. And if you see the BHEL position today is down by 25% in last year orders. That clearly is not having collateral impact on the banking sector and the equipment manufacturers. Second challenge which he has today, luckily the cabinet has already cleared the debt restructuring package of DISCOMs who are financially very stressed. Test lies in its implementation, in a very strict monitoring of the loss control targets and the tariff increase over there. Because we have seen in the last about 2 decades, all these experiments start in the first 2 years and suddenly the losses go up. And after 10 years, again, we have a restructuring scheme coming up.
Right, so 2 important issues that you've raised, sir. First, of course, is fuel, and then you said the key really lies in the implementation of the SEB restructuring package. But if I can get Mr. Pramod Deo in here, sir, do you really agree with what Mr. Khurana has said, and do you then think that the success of what the power minister really does going on from here would also depend on a lot of other ministries like coal, for instance, because fuel the overhang of the fuel shortage issue is clearly something that the coal ministry would also have to look at.
Yes, I agree with Mr. Khurana that these are the 2 important issues on the top of agenda. But of that, as you very rightly said, it is not the power ministry alone. It has to be done in conjunction with coal ministry, and the issues like the pooling of cost of imported coal and the domestic coal are something which requires really the consultation with the state government, and there is some opposition for such a measure. So those are the issues which obviously will be dealt with. But the most important thing is when we talk about reforms in the power sector, actually what has happened is that the reform has taken is on the generation side. The new capacity addition has been something very phenomenal. In this 11th plan in 5 years, we have added 42% private sector's capacity. And today the share of private sector has gone to 27% in the total generation capacity of 207 gigawatt. Now this is really a game changer, because what is happening is that with the private players coming in, question comes is that they have to sell power to state-owned distribution companies or state electricity boards, And that's why the restructuring of the debt of state discoms or SEBs becomes something very important. But the restructuring has one side, that is the bank's involvement in that. But the most important part is the conditionalities which had to go with the restructuring. Like the regular tariff revision has to be done, then they had to reduce their losses. That is something very important. And unless progress is made on that, we are going to face the similar type of crisis in near future.
Right.
So that's something which is an agenda, new benchmarks have to be set.
India's #1 news app just got even better. Download NDTV's new app. Fully optimized for retina display. Full screen view. Faster response time. And Sudoku. NDTV's new iPad app. Download now.